So as a result, we'll start with the Assabit River Bluff project. Good evening, and thank you for attending. I'll begin by calling roll call. John, and he'll state your name and your the source of your representation, John.
I'm John Kratzley, and appointed by the Select Board.
Thank you, John. Paul?
I am Paul Bohm, appointed by the Recreation Department Commission.
Thank you. Nancy?
Nancy Nelson, appointed by the Historical Commission.
Thank you. Tom?
I'm current Select Board appointee.
Thank you. Charles?
Charles Phillips, appointed by the Housing Authority.
Thank you very much. And Peter, behind that orange screen? There you are.
Yay.
Can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
I can lip read.
Maybe your volume, could you turn up your volume on your machine, maybe, Peter? Sometimes that's the reason people can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay. Peter Ward, Select Board appointee.
thank you. And Diane Proctor, Select Board appointee. Welcome, everyone. We have all sorts of materials to cover tonight. But let me begin by saying that at the Select Board meeting last evening, the White Pond Advisory Committee that has asked for funding, $36,000 to try to corral the cyanobacteria. That money is now being absorbed and being put in officially to the town budget. So that project will probably by that group be withdrawn. That application will be withdrawn, and the town will assure us that and has assured us that they will undertake to work with White Pond Advisory Council and Mr. Higgins to have all of that go forward. So that was that is wonderful news, I think, and it eliminates all of the concerns about, can a town committee do this, and how do we do it financially, and the other concerns that were raised by council. So this was good news all the way around. At the committee meeting last night at the Select Board, I was reminded by a wonderful note from Liz Rust that to just remember to say that the RHSO membership fee, which is one of our very first. It's number A on our list, the Town of Concord Regional Housing Service Office. That is actually the funding for that is actually there. She's asking, or they're asking for 28,000, but the town budget also puts in 28,000, and the CHDC also adds money, so that this is not something that merely the CPC funds and develops. And Junction Village, the residential portion of the project, is called Christopher Heights. We all know that. But the open space park is going to continue to be called Junction Village. So we'll have both the, the nomenclature of Junction Village and Christopher Heights running simultaneously. And for those of us who were very much involved in and part of those deliberations years ago, when this project was first undertaken, the name of it can prove problematic or at least confusing. So here's what Liz precisely says. The residential portion of the project is called Christopher Heights, but the open space park is going to be Junction Village. The overall property contains both the Christopher Heights Assisted Living Facility and the Junction Village Park. So that the names of those two organizations, and what I said last night was Junction Village, which some of us know as Christopher Heights, and so she added some clarification. I can see that we have Lee Smith with us, and I've asked Lee, who is the chair. Hi, Lee, who is the chair of the Concord Housing Development Corporation, correct?
Correct.
Right. To come and speak with us and to address as our really first item to discuss the Assabit River Bluff project, mainly because what became so very clear at our last meeting is that the recipient of our funds, if we were to vote the amount requested, the $1 million or any other part of it, would go right to the CHDC, and they would be the managers of that money. And so the questions that emerged for, I think, our deliberations, making it very clear that once we give, if we are to fund it, if we do that and pass that over, our capacity to influence how that money is used as a CPC is negligible. So it really falls into the arms of the CHDC. So two questions emerged in my considerations. The first one, and Lee has incidentally been fantastic in walking me through all this, but the first question is, what are the opportunities, what are the possibilities of raising the additional funding of the remaining 1.8 million toward the whole 1 million to be offered? And secondly, with that money, how would you imagine proceeding to use that money? And to what degree does that involve community involvement and discussion, et cetera? So Lee, take it away. And
Thank
Liz,
you very much.
I was going to say Liz Russ will be joining us at 8 o'clock. She's in a meeting right now, so that if Lee has to leave at 8, so that if we have remaining questions, she'll be here to pick up the baton. Okay, thank you, Lee.
Thank you for inviting me. So just a slight clarification. So this is kind of new breaking news, if you will. So there was a year or so ago, the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust that was established. And the plan all along was for that trust to be the recipient and gatekeeper, if you will, for funds, town funds for affordable housing purposes. Prior to that, the funds that had been appropriated from free cash were under the control of the town manager, under the direction of the select board. So I wasn't present for it last night, but I think what I heard was that that perhaps the select board had decided to move the funds that they were controlling formally to the Affordable Housing Trust. And it's my anticipation that any CPC funds that might be appropriated would also go not to directly to the CHDC, but to the Affordable Housing Trust. So I think that's an important distinction to make and clarification. And this is like literally started moving forward yesterday. So, more to come on that, but that's my understanding.
Okay.
CHDC is having a joint meeting tomorrow night with the Affordable Housing Trust, and we're going to be discussing the development of their guidelines as well as this project and what expectations are, thoughts and issues, that kind of thing. So that piece is evolving, but I guess to maybe more directly answer your first comment, I at least as of today, I wouldn't expect the funds to go directly from the appropriation to CHDC, assuming the project went forward and everything was in place at the closing. There would be some mechanism whereby those funds would come from the trust, probably to CHDC to fund the closing on the acquisition of the property.
Okay, Linda Escobedo, hello, Linda, is there behind her name. And so if we have questions vis-a-vis the select board, I trust Linda will chime in and inform us.
So I think Lee did a very accurate job of capturing where we are in the moment. And as he said, it's evolving, and we'll have another meeting tomorrow night between the Concord Municipal Affordable Trust and CHCD. So thank you for everyone being patient as we put all these pieces together.
Thanks, Linda. So I would characterize that piece generally as mechanical, assuming there's consensus amongst all the stakeholders that'll be worked out between now and July.
And to the second question, so then toward the trust, than to pass the money over to the Concord Housing Development Corporation Commission. I'm sorry. What would be your strategies or plans for using those resources? And I see we have several committee questions to add to the question I'm asking right now, Lee.
Sure. So the expectation is that the entirety of the funds that were attributed to this project to go through CHDC would be used, I think, exclusively for the ultimate acquisition price, including closing costs, as well as legal fees and other closing related expenses.
So in terms of then how that money goes forward, would you sell the property to a developer?
The plan as we sit today, and again, it's an evolving project, but the idea is that as we would have public process moving forward, determine what portion of the property to be acquired would be dedicated for open space and conservation, and what portion would be remaining for community housing or affordable housing. And then presumably it would be divided. A permanent conservation restriction would be put on the open space portion. The remaining portion would be available for development for affordable housing purposes. That would most likely include also market rate housing. The number of units, market rate versus affordable is yet to be determined. But the idea at the moment is that we would have a further planning process and further refine the concept plans that you all have seen thus far, and then engage in a public process to elicit comments from townsfolk, what they like, what they don't like, and then come up with a preferred alternative. And that would presumably include minimum requirements, including like a minimum number of affordable units and other elements of a housing development. And then that would go out in a request for proposals to the development community and include any restrictions that we would require for affordable housing. And then see what those responses look like, and probably have further public process and input, and then ultimately choose a developer and then sell the affordable housing portion of the parcel only to that developer, who would then develop it in accordance with our requirements.
Thank you. That helps a great deal. Tom Kearns, you had your hand up first.
Diane, maybe a question or a couple of questions for Lee and maybe for Linda too. So Lee, is this the first time that potentially CPA funds will end up in the housing trust?
Well, since it's just newly created, I assume so, yes.
It would seem so, right? And so,
yeah.
And that group will help to kind of manage the distribution, the
Right,
investment and the
so
distribution thereof. I'm just wondering, do we have an understanding of who, and there's a separate group of people that are administering the trust?
that's right. So it's the trustees, I think Linda, Mike Lawson, Keith Bergman, and help me out with the others. But
Town manager at this point.
I guess it's really a question and not leading in any way. I'm just wondering, does the CPC need to have some interface or kind of understand who this is, who this body is, and the members and the nature of the organization? And I guess maybe that's maybe a discussion for our committee. But since it's new, and in terms of us having some responsibility to know where things are ending up and how it's getting administered. So okay, anyway, that any reflection you all have on that would be helpful for me. Thank you.
Yeah, Linda.
Yeah, thank you. A point well taken, and for the committee not to be offended by not having already had that conversation. We are in fact just initiating that process, talking to all the key stakeholders, of which you would be one, and that's being initiated tomorrow, as you could hear, with a joint meeting with CHCD. There's been there's been an introduction already to a recent meeting of the Housing Roundtable, just to generally introduce that we were up and running and that we would be meeting with each of the stakeholder groups. So thank you for that, because it's timely, but not to be offended that you haven't been already approached.
No, just kind of curious. Thank you, Linda. That helps me a great deal.
Thank you, Tom. And when I asked Lee, I didn't know if it was solidified yet. Lee, go ahead, please. You were
I was just going to say that this is just my assumption, and Linda, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that once the new trust is up and running, that at the appropriate time following town meeting, assuming there's an approval of the appropriation, that CHDC would make a formal request to the trust for the particular amount of funds that we would need for the closing to acquire the property.
Which leads me to a very technical question. Were you part of the appraisal of that property, Lee? Was your committee part of the appraisal of that property?
I believe one of the town departments got the appraisal, and then there was a subsequent appraisal based on certain assumptions with respect to different types of development. In particular, I think it was a 4 or 6 lot subdivision.
So,
but CHDC did not request the appraisal directly, but I think it was a town department.
So there have been 2 independent appraisals of that property at this point. You're not.
There was an initial appraisal, and then I'm not sure if revised or updated. I'm not sure exactly what the right term is, but we asked them to reevaluate it based on different assumptions, and we got a second analysis.
So the CHDC requested that.
Again, the one of the town departments did, but this was all like within the ad hoc informal working group that includes town departments, myself, Liz Rust, and the open space interests.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Lee, you may have answered this in your description, but let me just ask anyway. I want to connect Marsha Rasmussen's discussion of the project, description of various options, with now the mechanical management of the process, which I presume is going to be conducted by the CHDC. Of course, there are a number of options that are on the table, none of which have been fully described. I think what you're saying that the CHDC will manage that process, which will include open discussion amongst the residents, and ultimately there'll be a plan before the town meeting. But there's a lot of open discussion involving community input on the resolution of the open space versus housing that will occur between now and then. Very similar to what Marsha described, and now it sounds like you'll be managing that process. Is that correct?
I wouldn't go as far to say as that CHDC or myself will be managing it, but I would consider ourselves all equal stakeholders, and so I would maybe include the housing interests, the open space interests, the town and municipal interests, and anybody else who's a stakeholder as working collaboratively in that public process.
But any sort of open meetings, the discussion will be set up by CHDC?
To be honest, I hadn't really thought that completely through, but there's been discussion of maybe even depending on the timing of your process for recommendations, maybe a public forum, if time permits. I guess depending on quorums and other things of that nature with respect to the open meeting law, whether they'd be technically public meetings of our respective boards and committees, but certainly a public forum to have a broader discussion amongst everyone in the town who wanted to participate.
Okay, thank you. I think that you've connected the dots for me. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Paul, very much. Peter.
Yes, 2 questions. One is, given that the applicant was CHDC, how does this change things, if any? And I guess secondly, the second question I have has to do with the presentation that Marcia gave at the last meeting, where 3 options were discussed, and I was just curious as to, in terms of the funding request, at what point will these options be further reduced to I guess, a final contender?
Sure. So CHDC is the applicant. I've heard some question regarding, well, CPC typically receives either open space requests or community housing requests, but this maybe unusual in that it's both. What I would say to that is I view them as 2 separate requests, with the difference being that what we have here is a single parcel of land that's offered for sale, but it's got those 2 components. So not to suggest what your committee should do, but they strike me as 2 separate independent requests, as the plan would be to divide the property and dedicate one to open space and one to community housing. So I guess I would just hope that those concepts wouldn't be confused, just as it's maybe an unusual or first impression for your committee. As far as the concept plans that have been presented thus far, we're really at the really early stages of the whole process of evaluating the project. I told Diane the other day that the concept plans that you received the day of your meeting the other day were only received by our informal working group that same day. So, we're kind of working through this as quickly as we can, and we're kind of limited by the patience of the seller, the private seller of the land. So the idea that we've discussed is, if this were to move forward, then we would begin to engage in a much more open and public discussion of the concepts and what do the different interest holders or residents or whomever may choose to comment, what are their comments, and evolve that in a much greater degree with a much more robust planning process, and figure out what the best concept for this combination of open space and community housing development could look like, and what's really in the best interest of the town, all things considered. And that would happen between presumably a recommendation in favor from your committee, and will hopefully conclude well before town meeting.
Peter, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess just to clarify, so if indeed the recommendation was to move forward for funding for this, the recommendation would be to provide the funding to CHDC because they're the applicant. But is that correct?
That is a good technical question. I honestly don't know if if anyone else would be the appropriate recipient of the funding on the open space piece, but we can certainly, I think, determine, let's just say hypothetically, CHD was the sole recipient. I think there could be stipulations that whatever amount was dedicated to open space could be used only for the open space portion, or I'd have to give some more thought to how perhaps maybe we need to involve town council as to exactly how the mechanics of that would work.
Thank you.
Thank you. John?
I'm sorry, before you go on, Diane,
Of course.
just my brain is spinning. The idea is that CHDC would take title, would be the purchaser of the whole property,
That's
and
what I
then
thought.
at some point during the process, presumably it would be subdivided into 2 parcels, and then the open space piece would obviously go to them. So perhaps it's less complicated than we may need to make it, but I think certainly it would be based on the understanding as to what the ultimate division of the open space versus the community housing division of the parcel would be.
And Lee, you don't see that as our committee's determination. You see that as a decision by CHDC and the town and others and the recreation stakeholders when they come together to try to determine how that land will be used.
I do, I think, the big piece other than your funding recommendation and the recommendation for an appropriation from free cash to the extent it's necessary is also in conjunction with whatever fundraising is going on privately, both on the open space side and the housing side. So, it may not be until closer to town meeting when we know exactly how much money and from which pots we have to draw, exactly what the various allocations would be.
Okay, thank you. John.
Just to speak to you and Tom and maybe Linda on the concerns about the Affordable Housing Trust. There is some history in which, and I don't know that I have his first name right, but Mr. Bergman, maybe Lee can help me. Is it Paul or Keith? Keith Bergman, who was the chair of the drafting committee for the trust, actually came to me when I was chair of the CPC, and I thought I shared it with the committee at the time to open some conversations about how our money would be integrated or blended, or what role our money would have with the housing trust or the Affordable Housing Trust. The trust eventually got drafted without any specific reference to CPC housing money. And I think now we've come around full circle to their having a role in creating the funding for this particular land acquisition. But they did come to us quite a time ago in the drafting process.
Thank you, John, for that history and for that understanding. Charles.
I wanted to speak to maybe some more history. What Lee has described is exactly how the Junction Village property was eventually decided, the use of it and how it was divided. Because the CHDC, having obtained that property, then sent out requests for proposals for housing. I think they got 8 proposals. There was a very contentious public process.
Right.
And eventually, as a result of that, I mean, I think the initial choice was for family housing, and that was so there was so much opposition that the CHDC then went to Grantham for the current plan. So that's exactly the sort of the way that he described this is going to go, and in fact, you have to have the development in order to know where the development open space. You have to have a specific development selected, and then that will, just like with Junction Village, and that will determine how much of it is housing and how much of it is open space.
Thank you, Charles, for that helpful elucidation of the past process and summary. Tom?
Thanks, Diane. So I just wanted to clarify for myself that this, and maybe Heather may actually be able to help me here, this will be administered different than other recommendations and funding for different applicants, in that typically we would be asking for biannual reports and tracking and dispersing and using certain timetable metrics around different grants. And in this case, the money would be off into the trust and blended and administered there, and there would be no further oversight by CPC. I'm not sure I understand that completely.
I think technically that's correct, because the request is for land acquisition under the specific categories of community housing and open space. So once the land is acquired, then technically the CPC aspect of the project is over. So we would close out the project.
Okay, thank you.
So that, and that's a really important distinction you've made, Tom. I mean, that summarizes the process with a clarity that is really important. So thank you, Tom and
Well,
Heather.
yeah, if I may, I was, imagining scenarios, but if in fact we were not able, let's see, CHDC and the town were not able to aggregate together the $2.8 million and not able to move forward, that there is the potential that the money would be returned to the CPC budget in the subsequent year.
One presumes that.
Hmm.
Which would give us a rather robust, budget to work on in the following year. Nancy.
Isn't there some provision for continued oversight of how the CPC funding is utilized in terms of open space through the provisions of the grant agreement? I'm a little bit concerned that the open space or the open space aspects might get
Compromise.
might get reduced or somehow forgotten and not as front and center as we might think they are right now. So grant.
I think that's something we could write into the MOU as conditions.
The grant agreement.
Yes.
For town projects, it's a memorandum of
Oh, sorry.
understanding.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be important given the feelings that we've seen in all of those letters and meetings that we've all been to in terms of the importance of preserving a major portion of that site for open space.
Thank you, Nancy. And that's really an important addendum to our discourse. Lee, I also wanted to say that, and just to have it stated publicly, is that we have heard the full range of opinions about this property. And the one that has been the least given the least airspace has been any disruption to that space disrupts the Assabit River. That it is not exactly a robustly flowing river that is not vulnerable. It's one of the scenic, byways, and that the minute we start cutting down trees, which would inevitably be a part of any development, we begin to undermine the root systems, and the entire kind of communication and integrity of that space in terms of its land. We heard that articulated once, but we have not really heard that as strongly articulated. And I think that's an important part of how our citizens and community feels. So there's that one on the far side, and it's not that this is left or right in any case, but and then on the other side, has been yes, and we need affordable housing very much, and as much affordable housing as we could build there would be terrific. So I mean, there has been that tug and pull throughout, and it's been a very informing discourse, I think. Paul.
Yeah, I just want to confirm. So all CPC funds have to be approved at town meeting. So I assume that what's going to come out of the deliberations is a specific proposal that the residents will look at town meeting. And that specific proposal will have some details about open space versus housing, so that the residents can actually vote on something and approve that. And at that point, they will approve a specific project with, as many specifics that we're talking about here, divisions of open space, numbers of housing units, all the details. Am I correct? Is that the nature of the I guess the end game of the approval of town meeting? I guess I'm asking Diane, Heather, anybody here, because it seems we need a specific proposal that the town can actually vote on here. Yes.
Heather, you want to take that first, and I've got to.
I'll let Lee go.
So one of the challenges of this project and the timing of everything is the relatively small amount of time that there is. I think the acquisition of the property really has to be the focus on the request for funding, both from your committee as well as free cash or whatever other sources there may be. What we've been saying is that, at least on the community housing side, we'd like to, what we've been calling land bank it, and take the amount of time that it needs to really fully examine it and get the public input we need and see what Just for example, what are construction costs like? Is it, are we better waiting an extra year, et cetera? So I don't want to misrepresent that by town meeting, we will say, this is our development plan. I would expect that we would have some much further evolved concept plans, hopefully more than one, as possibilities. But we also have to involve, I think, people with expertise in the development community as to what makes sense. So, I think ultimately by the time of town meeting, what we'll be asking to vote on is possibilities. And I would hope, a relatively nailed down size of what the open space parcel will be. And then, I think we'd be hurting ourselves to lock that in 100%. But the idea, I think, would be maybe there could be adjustment on the edges, if you will, depending on what the ultimate development plan is. But a more developed concept plan with maybe more than one option to be presented to town meeting is what I anticipate.
Yeah, no, I understand, and that's it is a conceptual plan that then you have to take into development. That's not going to happen until the land is purchased, but I think
and well after that.
Right, there's been a lot of concerns of various types, expressed here. So I think those concerns will have to be addressed conceptually in that plan that's voted on.
And I think that's prudent, Paul. Lee, I said last night at the select board meeting, we had 87 people at our last meeting. I think it was 67, but that's all right. I was off the top of my head, I decided to mention that we had a lot of people. I think am I right, Heather, about 67 people, not 87?
It was actually 113 at one point.
Wow.
Whoa, you mean I understated it? Well, that's a rare moment in my life. There's a wonderful New Yorker cartoon in which an old man is sitting on a bench and he's talking to a kid and he says, always exaggerate, it makes life more interesting. So who knew 113? Okay, well, I understated something. Does the committee have other questions of Lee at this point? Is there anybody in the public who would like to ask any questions? I think Nancy Kerr, you might have a question. I want to make sure you have a chance to ask questions if you have them, and anyone else in the public who may have something to ask.
Well, I am always asking questions about this project because it is near to my heart and also near to where I live. So I am concerned about, well, first of all, I think I'm just questioning the price of this land, because I think if you go in 75 feet from the rail trail and then you go 100 or even 200 from the stream and from the river, I don't see where you're going to get 6 subdivision houses, which I assume is how the price was determined by, the most expensive way to develop it would be that. And I don't think, well, I just question that. So that's number one. Number two, I think the neighbors are going to really want to have some kind of guarantee by town meeting about the open space and how much we're going to get. Because I think if the land is purchased and down the road we end up with 12 units of 12 buildings of 24 units or some crazy thing, I think we're going to feel really deceived and really undermined. So I think there's got to be some kind of guarantee that at least by town meeting, if not by the time this committee decides, of how much is going to be devoted to housing.
I think you've also asked some pertinent questions about septic systems, Nancy.
Well, exactly. I mean, you've got a river there. Like, is each unit gonna have its own septic? I mean, I don't get that, because we're looking at White Pond that needs to be cleaned up because of all the houses around it. Let's not have the same thing happen to the Assabit River. I mean, I know they're different bodies of water, different sources of water, but you get my point.
Yeah. Lee, do you know anything about septic systems on that property? I mean, are the other houses relying on septic systems around it? Or are they?
That's my understanding. I don't think there's sewer that runs up that far.
That's what I,
I think one analysis for kind of a worst case scenario assumed that a sewer extension could be brought up there. But just one point on kind of the minimum open space. I think that's the way we're looking at it right now, that as this evolves by town meeting, hopefully we'll be able to say there'll be not less than X number of square feet dedicated to open space. And, the shape of it may, could change after that. I don't quite know, but, I think particularly in association with the fundraising efforts on both the open space and affordable housing side, both those groups are going to want to know what to expect. So
Exactly, right.
that's my anticipation, that it would, they would each have kind of not less than square
Right.
footage for the various uses.
Okay.
thank you. Thank you, Nancy, and thank you. Are there other questions from anybody who's attending the meeting? Linda Escobedo, will you help us set up an opportunity at our next meeting to have somebody from, are you and Lee together, somebody from the trust come and speak to us? I mean, you're on that committee. It might be that you're willing to represent them, but as an observer, you may want somebody else. So however, will you guys talk among yourselves?
We will. We meet tomorrow, as you could hear. And
Yes.
so if not your next meeting, within the next 2 meetings, we'll certainly try to do that.
Okay, because we're encroaching, we just have so many meetings before we have to make final decisions. So
Right, right.
the sooner you
And,
can.
I think Lee's done a great job of being as concrete as he can with what this scenario would look like. And I think it's, I think we're going to be more or less in the same position, but we're happy to have that conversation.
Thank you so much. Lee, and out of respect for the time, thank you for joining us tonight. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Just is the meeting date set yet on when you'll be making your votes on recommendations?
Well, we have the possibility of 3 more meetings. 1 more
Okay.
in December and 2 in January. It would be lovely if we didn't have to use all 3 of those meetings, but we may have to in order to gather together all the information that we need. So
Okay,
that's
great. Thank you for inviting me, and to the extent you have further questions, I'm happy to try to assist in any way I can.
Nancy, did you have a question? Okay, thank you, Lee, so much. And thank you for spending
right.
time with us. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, well, I took that opportunity on because I thought that after the last meeting, some things really needed some clarification. So I hope that was helpful, and I look forward to having the somebody from the trust come and speak to us, because I think that would continue to clarify some of the questions we have. Okay, going forward, our next task is to, first of all, take the $36,000 out that was requested by the White Pond Advisory. So if you take that one, which is J on our list here, and eliminate $36,000, that's a bit of a help for getting down to, where we would like to be in terms of the Heather usually has a magic computer that she keeps track to tell us then how much we still need to eliminate. And so that's one thing. The second thing is, at the select board meeting last night, Matt Johnson was supposed to send me a summary of that discussion. And I have not received it. So I'm loath to try to summarize their discussion with any great specifics, but let me share some of the points that came up last night. Linda, you were there, so let me see if I can. Right, Tom, you listened to it? Okay, so let me see if I'm going to just go item by item and try to recall some of the discussions. Regional Housing Office services, there seemed to be approbation approval of that across the board. The 110 Walden Street preservation, there were some questions that people asked about, 2 questions actually. One, do they have enough money to go forward to do the things they need? And do they need this money? But I think that in the end, and Linda and Tom, interrupt me at any moment if you think the summary is wrong, because I was trying to both present and listen. But there ended up being, I think, high approval for that particular project.
Diane,
Yes,
if
Tom.
I may, yeah, there were a question or two about that, and I thought that Anita did a very nice job with some supplemental material explaining that. And Diane, I thought you did a nice job last night explaining that to the select board. So
Thank
yeah, I agree.
Okay. The Old Man's Exterior Preservation Project, by and large, there was significant support for that, although less robust enthusiasm. So there was a process of low priority, medium priority, and high priority. And this one, I think, fell in kind of the medium to low priority category. It did not, there was not a standing ovation about the importance of that funding. Would Linda and Tom agree that that's kind of where that one landed? Okay. Thumbs up, just a thumb up, Linda. All you have to do, okay. The Wright Tavern structural repairs between low, medium, and high priority, that was I came about in the medium kind of category priority. I think some people had some questions about it. How much had we given in the past? Who was funding it? How was it working? But by and large, there was no great controversy around it. There was very high approval for the Concord Free Public Library requests. And there was very high approval for the Assabit River Bluff preservation housing. It's clear that the select board, by and large, felt that this was important and appropriate request for funding. Now, mind you, they didn't try to tell us how much, they didn't try to tell us how to vote, but in their discussions, this was one that did not receive any kind of controversial discussion. The Junction Village open space one did receive some questions, and I may not have presented it in a way that allowed us to understand that while the machines are there, we save some money by using the machines that are there. But in any case, the thought was, maybe we could just defer this for a year, perhaps reduce the costs of this, and particularly reduce the costs. I mean, that was one of the issues that came up rather strongly. So I would say that this became in the category of a low priority as far as the select board was concerned, and a question if maybe this could be a deferred process. The Bruce Freeman Rail Trail was proved quite interesting. There was the question as to whether the state is going to kick in some funding, which I think Marcia was meant to hear, but we have not yet heard. Heather, has Marcia sent you anything that would let us know?
Yes, I have an email from her today. I can screen share it. Just give me one moment.
I just want to thank Heather for being here because she is not feeling well.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know I've seen a few emails from board members, but I was out yesterday and today, so I'm trying to play catch up.
Around the first year of Charlotte. Happy birthday, Charlotte.
So there is a long paragraph here regarding Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, reducing the requested amount
to 80,000 is what I was
to
about to
80,000. Yes.
So she spoke to a committee and said that we had asked her to sharpen her pencil, and she said, well, take the $300,000 down and make it $80,000. And you can see in this language, a 2-rail fence will be part of the contract.
And Diane, I think that is assuming that the state is going to kick in. If not, there's always next year.
You're right.
So
That's exactly right, Paul.
Yeah.
So that gives us some more money. So although we've not heard that officially from Marcia, do we consider this an official statement, Heather?
I believe so, yes.
All right. So if we're down to 80,000 from 300,000, that gives us $220,000 reduction of the requirements or demands, right?
Excuse me, Diane, the next paragraph in the letter, I know we've just talked about maybe deferring Junction Village, at least in the eyes of the select board, but I think she's discussing about reducing the ask here.
Yes, and Charlene is Hempel. I mean, we're not ready for that one yet, Paul, if that's okay. When we get to that one, oh, we are at that one.
I think
We went right by it.
yeah, you just passed that by.
Charlene, you're here, I think, or I saw your name. Oh dear, she's left. Oh no, here she is.
No, she's there.
Hello, Charlene. Okay.
It's yes, hello, it's Carlene.
Carlene, I
Sorry,
apologize.
Nancy, it looks like Nancy wanted to say something and I didn't want to interrupt a committee
Um,
member.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to know if we could see a copy of that memo. It was hard for me to read all of it.
Yeah,
Yes, I will forward it.
Okay, that'd be great.
Everyone,
Thank
I
you.
just got it tonight at 6 o'clock.
Thanks, Carlene.
sorry,
pleasure.
Carlene, I apologize for mispronouncing your name. Please go.
Don't, everybody does, it's no problem at all.
No, names
Thank
are
you.
important. Okay.
Thank you. Do I have just a few moments to
Sure, absolutely.
respond? Okay. I wanted to respond to your characterization and also just update you on the project. Marcia and Liz and I both spoke today, or all three of us spoke separately. They were not together on the phone. And I wasn't able to attend the select board meeting last night. I was teaching, but I had a different impression from them. My sense was that Marcia allowed that this project and what we talked about today was taking $50,000 off the ask, understanding that you are attempting to rein in some of the applications to your group. I do think that it's really critical for me to emphasize to you that deferral will mean only more cost in the long run, because the site work that will be happening next year with, as you so smartly divided the projects, they are separate, but they are inextricably linked in the site work, and that Christopher Heights at Junction Village will be doing all of that earth removal and massive site removal. We want some of that earth removal to put into what will be part of this parkland, and also the conservation restriction that's being written as we speak essentially will allow for all of this machinery to come on during this site work, which all has to happen within the first year. And just to remind you, that includes invasive, it's not sort of the sexiest stuff, but it is the critical first phase for what will be this beautiful natural amenity to our village, which is invasive species removal, site cleanup, wetland protection, and basic earthwork that needs to be done when the equipment is available on site for the project, both because of the in-kind donation of $25,000, but also just the mere presence of these disruptive machines that we want to get in, remove the invasives, start the basic roughing out of the path and move out. So I would like to officially pull our request down to 250,000 with the idea that, we will make that up in future years when we come to you, and also in attempts to seek outside funding to further pull down that number. I hope that clarifies in terms of the sort of urgency of this first phase.
It's gorgeous, and thank you so much. I tried to emphasize that last night without being, suggesting anything partisan. I had to be, to do it as in some degree as neutrally as possible for each project. But that's very helpful, and thank you for your willingness to reduce. We didn't know that last evening. Let's see, Nancy, your hand is still raised. Do you have? do you have a question? Okay, Paul.
Yes, so should I interpret the select board's low prioritization, some of lack of understanding of the urgency of this phase getting going, and if
I
they
think-
heard what, if they heard what Charlene just said, they would have thought differently.
I'm not sure. I don't know for sure. Yes, Linda.
So I walked away with a slightly different impression, and I have just emailed to Matt to see if we can get the rankings from last night, but I walked away with the impression that it was, the select board was more clear about the higher priority items, and that this one sort of fell in the lower to moderate category. I didn't see it necessarily, and there was a question about whether or not the amount of work could get done for the 300,000 in the year for what was being asked. So I think that was just my take on it.
Thank you, Linda, so much. Susan Bates had said maybe we could defer it for a year. And so that was also part of the discourse.
Right, but then
I
I
don't
think
think anyone said, let's not do it. But-
Right, yeah.
Yes, before Carlene, just a minute, Peter?
Yeah, just to be clear, so are we saying the request has been dropped from 300 to 250,000? Did I hear that?
Yes.
Yes.
And this is for Junction Village Phase 1.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to add another clarifying point to something that happened with that you asked for at a previous meeting. I don't know if it's appropriate now, but I wanted to tell you that I presented to the NRC and they made some suggestions, all of which I've discussed with our landscape architect and all of which are possible. And I'm meeting again with Delia and Greg Higgins of the NRC tomorrow to further cement that. So I wanted you to know that the request that you had to look for some sort of affirmation from the NRC, we will, I believe we'll be able to meet all of the things that they were interested in adapting or amending, sorry, on the concept plan. I'm also presenting to the Historical Commission tonight, Thursday night. So I just wanted you to understand that we are moving in all of the directions that I think are necessary to get buy-in from the from the incredibly important various constituencies in town.
Stakeholders. Carlene, you've done a beautiful job. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for all that work. And it is a lot of work, particularly during COVID. We're all kind of batting around to some degree blindly sometimes. So this is really helpful. Okay, the Assabit River Pedestrian Bridge construction drawings. Well, things were charging right along and in terms of high priority until Matt Johnson spoke. And Matt said, look, this is a lot of money. If DOT is going to spend $4 to $5 million on this bridge, could we not be using those resources as a community, as a world? Because I pay state taxes, he said. Could we not be using this money in a way that would be more valuable to our community? He then said, look, we're going to get infrastructure money. And nationally, we're probably going to get some infrastructure money, I hope. Would it come to Concord? I don't know. But the question is this the best use of that enormous amount of money? And Matt was reflecting on the discussion that has gone on over the years about this particular bridge construction project. It's been discussed and on the books for a very long time. And so Matt was pretty, I would say, discouraged, and I don't think I misspeak, by the amount of money, including the amount of money to have somebody do construction drawings, and permitting 300,000 for that struck him as an awful lot of money. So what looked like a project that was receiving robust support from the select board was that support was not in any way collectively muted, but there was certainly a bucket of cold water poured on it by Matt in a very thoughtful way. I mean, if a bucket of cold water can be thoughtful, that's probably an extended metaphor that doesn't work, or a personification. But at any rate, you know, it was very interesting to hear. I don't think a consensus emerged after that in terms of further discussion that I recall. So, Linda.
Sorry, I was going to remain silent, but because I think you've done a good job characterizing Matt's point of view, which we all listened to carefully. But I do think that there was still, after that conversation, there were still 3 select board members, with a 4th one not voting on any of the projects, who felt strongly that this was a high priority. So I just want to balance your presentation
Yep.
with that.
Thank you very much. I should say that Henry Dane chose not to vote on any of them. So that's the reason. I mean, he had some opinions and he expressed them, but he chose not to vote. Linda, I'm so glad you're here and thank you very much. Okay. And number 10, Recreation Facilities Strategic Plan Consultant, the Concord Recreation Department. This was interesting because it became a kind of low priority for the select board. That doesn't mean it has to be for us, but it was emerged as something that they did not feel had the urgency that perhaps some of the other projects do. Treatment and prevention of the cyanobacteria is now removed, and the town is going to undertake responsibility for that. And then staff and technical services was a high priority. So where does that?
A question on the recreation strategic plan. Was the sense that it was not needed, it was not urgent, could be deferred, or they don't need a plan at all? What was your sense?
Paul, of all the things that I recall being discussed with the least degree of specificity, it was just a feeling that there was not an urgency or a need to do this right this minute. But I don't think there was no one that said, what? How could you spend that? I mean, there was nothing like that. It was just that in the list of things about which they cared passionately, this did not emerge as one of the passionate concerns. Peter.
Yes, 2 questions. One was, where did the select board wind up on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail? I don't recall whether that was a low, medium, or high. And also,
oh, that's right. We got discussing it, and I didn't. Well, once it went down to $80,000, I think there was a feeling that was a manageable cost. You know, once we lost the $220,000 that aren't going to be part of it, it became, people. I think there was a general approbation for that project, Peter.
okay, and then the Assabit River Bridge, where was that left off? I heard what Linda had said, but I just wasn't sure what the consensus.
I think Linda's right. I wanted to express Matt's strong statement just because I felt it as a statement of principle. It was not an uninteresting one for us to hear. You know, it's like listening to the many people who have spoken to us with such passion and articulateness about the Assabit River Bluff project. You know, we've heard some very passionate statements, and in the absence of Matt being able to make it here, I wanted us to hear it. Whether it will influence our decision-making or should, I don't know. But there was, as Linda suggests, there were 3 people who very much approved it. And then there was one who said, wait a minute. So, and it was at the end of the meeting, and it was almost the last statement. So it had a kind of crescendo to it. Peter.
Okay, just one last question. Are we going to be receiving these prioritizations by the select board in some form of document?
Matt said he was going to send it, but it didn't come today. And I should have probably written him and said, where is it? But I figured there was some reason why it didn't get to me. So has he gotten to you yet, Linda? Do you have it? Because
as I said a little while ago, I've emailed him again and asked him to forward it to us. It will not be in the same format that the committee saw last year, where we actually had rankings for every single one. We took a different approach this year, which was to more or less identify those that we thought were the highest priorities, and commented that we thought all of the projects were worthy, but we were just going to highlight the ones that we thought were the highest priority. And so you'll see that those rankings. So it should be forthcoming.
And I was hoping he'd send it maybe to Heather, and that's the reason I didn't get it. I didn't want to disturb her today to ask her. So
I didn't receive it today either, and I was
Okay,
I've
expecting.
not seen
you know,
it.
Matt is so responsible. I'm sure it will be coming. You didn't get it, did you, Heather? Okay. Tom,
Thanks, Diane. So I wanted to also maybe follow up, Linda, on what you just said. So it is for the last several years that I've been involved with CPC, it is a little bit of a different framework this year. That in the past, we have received a more clear ranking, and maybe everything that's on the select board plate meant, to change direction a little bit. We also have typically received another kind of parallel ranking from town manager, and maybe given transitions and things that are happening this year, that didn't seem as appropriate or relevant as well. So, but I thought the comment that, or a couple of the comments that were made were important, and that was that I think the select board made comments such as CPC is closer to this material, the applications and the hearings. And I think that, well, I think the group said over a couple of times that, we don't want to kind of micromanage this for you. We'd really like to have you bring your recommendations forward. And I thought that was pretty reasonable.
I did
So it was
too.
a good discussion. Yeah.
and in fact, thank you so much. My final comment from the meeting was that there was an appreciation for the care and the kind of scruples that we've exercised in looking at each project and their values. In that respect was clearly stated, which was nice to hear. and that felt good. So Heather, where are we in terms of the monies we have versus the gap at this point?
Let me do some math.
Okay.
Heather, does my spreadsheet work for you? Did you get that?
I did not get it yet. It's
Oh,
probably
really?
sitting in my, it's probably sitting in my email. There's lots
Oh,
in there.
okay.
I haven't seen.
I thought I fixed it up.
I did a quick calculation and it looks like a $200,000 gap.
That's what I was thinking. That's exactly what I thought, John.
Yeah.
I think it's actually closer than that, because if we look at the memo that we received from the finance department on November 17th, we actually have a fair amount more in the undesignated fund balance than we had seen in the first memo that went on October 26th. So I calculate a gap of $90,000.
What are
So-
you using as our available money?
Yeah, what are you starting with?
Can we bring up the memo from the finance department that was dated the 17th, Heather?
I think it was 2,153,741.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's bigger than the spreadsheet.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that made a gap with the
That's
request.
$110,000 more. I'm sorry, Nancy, go ahead.
I'm sorry, the requests, I think, were at one point 2,545,000. So the gap was about 259,000.
And then we took out tonight,
We took $36,000 out, 36,000, and we took 220,000 and
Yep.
50,000 out.
Yeah, 36,
I think it was down to 1,000.
285 and 50.
Actually, 90,600.
Is the gap.
That's what I show, yeah.
That's closer to what I was thinking. And then there may be more, there may be others, so close.
So 9,600 is a gap. Okay. A technical question before we begin a discussion again on these projects. Does anybody, and Heather, I'll turn to you for this. We've often put aside money for various purposes or reasons. Is there anything that I mean, we've had $1,000 kind of in a bank. Is there anything, what is the general advice about how much of the available funding that should not probably be spent in any one given year?
That varies every year.
Okay.
Some years you leave nothing and you spend everything, and some years there's money left over. It really varies.
Okay,
And sometimes we don't quite hit the percentage.
right. Oh, that, I mean, that one for sure, Tom. But I think we've checked and we're hitting the percentages right now spot on. So I mean, I think we're okay there. So that's the good news.
A related question, is it historically true that there's been unspent money? That, I mean, as we sit here, we don't know that there'll be unspent money for next year, but there has been unspent money.
Well,
return?
by the end of the year, if
Yeah.
there's unspent money, then that
Right.
becomes a genuine issue. And sometimes, I mean, part of the reason we have as much as we have this year, Paul, is because there was some unspent money that fed back in.
Right.
So, okay. Let's go through and do not something, this is a suggestion, something not unlike, again, what the select board did. High priority, absolute, and then the questions that remain, and let us, as we see what questions remain, see what kind of expertise or knowledge from the applicants we may feel we need going forward, like for instance, the discussion tonight about bringing in the Concord Land Trust group. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
The land trust,
The Concord, what's it called? The
housing
Affordable
trust,
Housing Trust,
the
right?
new housing trust.
The new housing trust thing, the
Yeah.
Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust.
There you go.
There you go. Okay.
Wow,
Yeah, learning all.
this
all.
town, this
there we go. Yeah, thank you, Nancy. So let's, the Concord Regional Housing is a for sure yes. And 28,000, right? Does anybody have any question about that?
No,
Sarah Grimwood couldn't be here tonight. I don't know where Burton is, but Sarah couldn't be here. Did you hear
planning
from
board meeting.
Heather? Did you hear from Burton?
I did not hear from Burton. There may be a planning board meeting tonight. I'm not sure.
Okay, all right. So
Excuse me, Diane, are you asking, is there any question or is it a high priority or is it some combination?
well, I
of
mean,
both?
I think that's a high priority, right? I mean, we don't have any.
Right.
Yep. Okay, so there we go. The Concord Home for the Aged, 110 Walden. John says high priority.
So
Medium,
Paul? Yep.
I think it's a high priority, but I do have some question on the funding, which
Okay.
I've raised before, whether more of the operating budget could be devoted to the project. I know Anita has presented it. So I think it's a high priority project, but I question whether the funding could be, request could be reduced a bit.
Take a little bit out of that one. And
and
Tom,
that's similar to what I would have said, although
okay,
I place it medium because I think maybe there are other resources or,
Yeah, so that's the interplay of the priority and the funding is it?
yeah, yeah.
hey, Tom, how do you feel?
110 Walden, I think is a high priority, and I think that, as I mentioned, Anita did a nice job breaking down their finances and what they're contributing and what they're kind of backstopping if there are unforeseen things. And I think what came up last night I think it was from Matt, was, he was kind of unsure of the overall kind of financial economic viability of the organization. So I would want to make sure they keep, they're going through a kind of healthy endowment period right now, but things tend to go up and down.
Quickly.
So yeah, I guess I'd want to, maybe there's some opportunity, but in the context of what we're doing here, for me, it'd be a high priority to fund this.
Okay, Charles?
Are we talking about the Walden Street?
Yes, hon. Yeah,
Yeah.
110 Walden.
Yeah, it's a great project. Should be funded.
So you have a high priority for you for that one.
Yeah.
John? High priority, John?
Given them a series of funding, and I think it'll be the last round.
Okay,
And I think Anita's a very persuasive
advocate.
manager for this.
I agree. Peter?
Yeah, I would rate this a high priority. I think as an organization, they've done a terrific job, building upon the historic recommendations in the historic structures report. I think Anita's done a really nice job of talking about the challenge of balancing preservation of principle and versus, drawing down funds to manage operating expenses, especially given shortfalls in some of the periods where they've had vacancies. So, and I think they've managed the projects very, very well. So I would also rate this as high.
Okay.
So I just have one observation that town council felt that this project was eminently fundable. As I recall, painting the exterior is a key part of that proposal. And town council was not supportive of the old manse using CPC funds for painting, which he felt was a regular maintenance obligation. So that's kind of something to consider in terms of if we end up funding one rather than the other for exterior painting.
Thank you, Nancy. So I'm hearing an HP minus, high priority minus. Does that make sense? Knowing that there's still questions to be resolved there? Yes? No, maybe? Paul, that's taking into account your reservation.
Yeah, I think it's fair.
Okay, HP minus, all right. The trustees of reservations and the old manse, where do we stand on that one? I'd love to hear from each of us on each of these as we go around. Who wants to start on this one?
I think I already said something.
Yep. So it's a high priority for you, right?
I would say medium just because, medium to high, just because I think the trustees are well-funded usually, but I must also say they have not really put that level of maintenance into the old manse that the town seems to think it needs. So,
Okay.
so
Tom?
Yeah, I would give it a medium high ranking as well. I think that during our discussion with the applicants, I remember asking the specific question, you see this as routine maintenance or something as a kind of extraordinary stabilization. And I thought they handled that pretty well. And their description was beautifully crafted in terms of, their care of this facility. So yeah, I would be in support of this. And I think my only concern as we had discussions with them was the request was too modest for what they may encounter. But
Right, and I think I share that concern. John?
Yeah, I would have it as a high priority. I'd like to see the building in good shape for 2025. It's in a critical location.
Thank you. Peter?
I think I would echo what John just said. I'm also, though, mindful of what town council said as well. So in that context, would the request be reduced if painting was not to be included? So I still have a question about that, about what that commentary means in terms of our recommendation.
Yes, thank you. Charles?
And it's a medium, but being a relatively small amount of money, we should go ahead with it. I thought they made a good explanation about the fact that it's really, the whole project is to reduce the amount of water infiltration all over the building,
Right.
and that painting was actually an important part of wrapping it up. So. No.
The caulking and the repairing that goes with that, right?
Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, I'd give this a high priority. I think this is a really important piece of historical significance in town. It probably gets more visibility than some of the other historical properties here, and it's a modest ask, and I don't quite understand what's maintenance and what isn't, is paint in or out. I put town council's commentary aside. I think it's a high priority project.
And there was, no.
Yeah, I mean, Nancy's comment is what's influenced me, is that you've got to preserve that property, and
Yeah.
it's not just routine maintenance. It's something that's bigger than that. With the with the woodpeckers attacking it, with with internal seepage in terms of water, that damage has really come not because they've not cared for it, and it just requires a painting. It's a whole lot more than that, I think.
Yeah.
But so this is a medium plus to HP minus, right?
Well, I changed mine to high. That's
Oh.
helpful.
It sounds like you're grading.
I would
you
I'm
also-
grading-
looking for clarity, that's all.
Okay, that looks like an HP minus then. We're right in that wonderful category. Okay.
It sounds like you're grading papers.
Oh, dear.
Oh,
I
Paul,
would also.
What, HP minus versus M plus.
I've done that a lot, Paul.
I know, you're experienced.
And as a director of admissions for years, let me tell you, you spent a lot of hours. Well,
Yeah.
is it
no.
18 or a 7? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right Tavern.
Diane, just one
Oh,
question
I'm
here.
sorry, Peter, I apologize. Yeah.
Please, I believe this is a high priority as well. I just was raising the issue of what town council had said, but no, I completely agree. This is a modest request, and it's a terrific opportunity and a terrific resource.
Peter, my sense was that the town council didn't understand the nature of the
Yes.
damage.
I
And-
agree.
And I mean, I think if we just took town council by the hand and walked him out there, he might understand a little bit better the needs and the reason for the deterioration, which is not routine painting and neglect, but in fact, assault by our avian allies and other things. And so she says knowing nothing about the law. So where's Burton? And of course we have John, our sage on these questions. So I would turn to John. Right Tavern, where are we on Right Tavern right now? And I see that Melissa is here, Sawfield, and from the Historic Commission. And I don't know if she would like to speak before we begin, or whether we want to speak about this first ourselves and then hear Melissa's reaction. That's probably the more appropriate way. Hi,
Can I
Melissa.
just say something? Diane,
Yes, please. Yeah.
I don't have really any comment. I have asked Tom Wilson, who has reached out to us to speak before the Historical Commission, but he will not be presenting until next month.
Oh, okay.
I think I'd be very interested to hear what you all have to say. I think there are a fair number of issues that we have heard nothing about. They were supposed to reach out to us and they have not.
Right.
So
I had a quite
I don't have
long.
anything to say.
Yeah, I had a quite long talk with them, Melissa, about clarification from last week's meeting. And was able to go over the paragraphs from their original contract in comparison. And I think they've done some soul searching on this one. And so I knew that they had reached out to you. I'm glad that they have, but they're not going to meet with you until January. Okay, thank you.
So, have at it.
Have at it.
Yeah.
You're fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, where are we? And do we want to hold off on this one? Or do we want to discuss it? So let's, as Melissa says, let's have at it and see where we are. Nancy, you want to start us off?
I was hoping somebody else would have an opinion, because I do think what I think in general. I think that this current proposal, this current request may not be ready for prime time. I've noticed a lot of issues in terms of the description of what the first grant was intended for. Melissa highlighted the issues with not being in consultation with the Historical Commission, which I think could have saved them a lot of time and money. I tried to match up the terms of the grant agreement. And in some ways, they're not in compliance really with the first grant agreement. And I have questions about how the specific elements of the first, they call it the first phase, which they now call a planning phase, but that's not the way we envisioned it. How the first phase fits with the second phase. And Tom, I got kind of lost here and needed, I think we need to see more clearly next time around what their second request would be after they get more specific about how they're going to use the $260,000 that they already have for specific things. In some way, in some places, those things overlap. So it's very complicated. The more I looked at it, the more uncomfortable I was with the way the work was being described. So that's, I would suggest this be deferred.
You mean our discussion be deferred or the funding be deferred?
The funding.
Okay.
But I'm willing to be corrected in terms of any misunderstanding I've had, because it's complicated. I think what they've described is complicated.
Peter and then Paul.
Yeah, I just want to ask a question on the CPC site. Under letters of support, there's a letter from the Historical Commission. Can I assume that letter was from last year?
That was from last year, November
Yes.
12th, 2020. The Historical Commission met, and that letter is supportive, but it also asks a lot of questions, Peter. If you go back and look again at that letter, I think you'll see that, I mean, I'm sure you know this, I don't.
I think
before I'm accused again by Paul of being a pedant, I would say that letter, certainly said this is important and let's go forward, but it also said we want to be able to ask a lot of questions and work with you. Yep, Nancy.
Could I be a little more specific about that? We said that the support was tempered. And one of the biggest concerns was that the ultimate use of the structure still has not really been defined. And whatever the ultimate use is will have a big impact on what the work is that they seek to be funding. So if there is to be no public use or purpose on the second floor, and I think that's currently the way it's going to be, because there's no way to make the second floor accessible, then you would not have to do the same things. And I don't think the impact of the historic preservation architects is very visible at this point. So that's the other thing. They may have an entirely different idea about, rather than steel beam supports and so on and so forth. That's all.
Yeah, this is such an important conversation. Paul, you were next, and then John and Melissa, Tom and then Melissa. So Paul, you were next.
Yeah, first of all, I want to be clear. I was admiring of your skills of grading, and I was not being, it's not a big pejorative at all. I was admiring. But I think, so I don't understand a lot of this project. I think Nancy and Tom know more of this, but certainly there's a lot of clarity that is lacking. So I think we should, I don't know if we should defer funding, but defer final discussion on this, because I do think that is potentially a very important project. It's aiming towards a 2024 party, celebrating historical event. And, so if, we can't defer this forever. So, but I'd like to defer the conversation till at least the people on this committee that seek clarity can get clarity to advise those of us who are way behind on the details here.
Thank you, Paul, very much. John and then Tom and then Melissa.
Yeah, I think I'm more leaning towards listening again on the clarification side. I didn't know, Diane, if Tom Wilson had said he'd be willing to return if we gave him some specifications.
Oh, very much he did. Yeah.
Because I sort of see this in three big questions in my mind. One has to do with the preservation restriction, including why they didn't talk to the historical commission, and will that preservation restriction, is it moving forward, and will they follow our grant conditions in developing it? So and it may be that the lack of that is or clarification on that is a problem in and of itself, but
Right.
getting past that, because the grant conditions do say it's developed prior to finalization, so they have to get it done before final plans, so they may have some time there. But the second one is the point that Tom Kearns made last time. How are they putting this year's money in motion? I loved his phrase. How did they put last year's money in motion? And I do think we need clarification on that. What is actually being spent on who and in what time frame? And if you're not really comfortable with that there, and I know that's one of Nancy's concerns, it would impact your the amount of money, if any, you'd be giving for a new grant. And so that's my third question is, if we get clarification on how this current money is being spent, what aspects that are not going to be finished or need additional funding? And I know Rosalind gave us a breakdown by moving monies from what she thought she needed this year into money she thought she needed next year. But I'd certainly like to hear them if they're willing to come. I don't know if it's the next meeting or one of the first meetings in January. I would welcome that.
John, they certainly expressed a willingness to come and talk again. Tom and then Melissa.
Thanks, Diane. So, John, I agree completely with your comments. And if I may just provide my perspective on those, I hope the committee would be willing to do a lot of work with the group again this year, into this cycle, into next year, to help make this application as good as it can possibly be. Because the project is that important. I mean, it is so important to our national identity, the town, you name it, however you want to define that. It's a very complex project. And on the surface of it, at least I feel that the owner applicants are also very complex, and they've had some evolution of their own structure. Fine, that's fine. But some of the threads are lost. And so when the applicant says, and I'm not suggesting that I'm absorbing everything in the little pieces, we get a little packet at a time. But what I thought I heard last time was that they retained Mark Bobrowski to develop the PR. And then I thought it was stated that he was not qualified to do so. And they were starting over and going back to the Nantucket Athenaeum and, and the original document and starting over. And, after we've spent quite a bit of time reviewing this PR, it kind of caught me by surprise. Like, okay, so what are we to do with that? So when I look at our town council's comments in his last paragraph and says, the first sentence says, because the repair of the Wright Tavern would serve solely a public purpose. And then I look at their current PR under 3.3 number 5 that says public access. This restriction does not require public access.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No, I'm not an attorney. So maybe in fact they're complementary, but they feel like they're in conflict. And when we've talked about respecting and preserving the interiors, and I know they want to do that, but then in writing, when they say we're not obliged to do that, you're just left conflicted, I think we're responsible to make it better than that, and to help them to the best extent we can. At a certain point, it's beyond our responsibility or realm or whatever. But I certainly would be willing to work with them over 2 or 3 or 4 more meetings to try to help them achieve the kind of clarity that would lead to funding.
Well, Tom and you and Nancy have been fantastic already in all this. And I know there's a certain frustration in everything. Yes, Melissa, thank you for your patience.
No, thank you. No, I mean, I just would like to reiterate what both Nancy and Tom have said. It's what we said when they first came to us over a year ago. What is the ultimate use of this house or this home, this tavern? It is one of the most important buildings in Concord, and its ultimate use matters a great deal. And I wouldn't want to spend any money on it other than basic stabilization, which I am understanding that it is stable, until you know what they want to do. I have read through what they requested, and as you've asked, how have they expended that money so far? I was briefly on the CPC, and my understanding is if you have to send in to Heather all your documents that indicate what you spent. And so I don't know what they've done, but they still haven't answered the fundamental question: is what do they ultimately want to do, and how can you spend money if you don't know what you want to do?
Thank you.
And I really applaud the efforts of the CPC to hold them to this, because that's the bottom line. That's the basic question. Also, I would point out that the preservation restriction, it isn't just with us, the Concord Historical Commission. This is something that's filed at the registry. It is it's a document of the state. So it is a very serious request of all of us that they do this.
Thank you. And again, the clarification that you and Nancy and Tom offer is so important, because not all of us have the background that you all have in historic preservation. And it is really helpful to hear specifics so that people either observing this as a tape or reserving it, on MMN, or are observing it right now, can understand the kinds of deliberations we're exercising and the kind of considerations we have. May I summarize this and just say that it seems to me that we're just going to defer discourse on this until we see when they can come back and discuss this with us. And perhaps, Heather, you'll reach out to them and let them know that this is important. Okay. Yes, Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Diane. I don't know if there's some specific and relatively simple framework that we could provide them with that would allow them to come back, with the right kind of focus. I don't know. I mean, I'd be happy to, maybe we do some work offline or whatever is appropriate there, or we can't work in subcommittees, but whatever that takes.
Yeah, the one that appealed to me was this 3 points that I made before. Tell us how the preservation restriction is going to get done.
Sorry, my machine was just running out of power. Go ahead.
Oh, my 3 concerns would be how and when will the preservation restriction get done consistent with our grant conditions?
Mm-hmm.
How is this year's money being put in motion? So that, and third, assuming you can fulfill that clarity, what additional monies do you need and in what amounts?
Yeah, and I think, may I add something to that, John, which is a sense of his public purpose.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Because I think that I'm much persuaded, as I listen to the discussion that we're having tonight, that is as important, and not just a general statement, but a commitment to a kind of public purpose that animates the CPC funding for this.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the public purpose is going to be limited pretty much to what it is on the first floor with some expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, I'm disturbed by the misunderstanding of what a grant agreement is, what the Historical Commission letter said, what constitutes phase 1 in their mind, and what constitutes phase 2. And finally, and maybe most importantly, I really want to see the involvement somehow of the historical people. The way the project is defined in the application, but even more, I think, in the update PowerPoint, it seems like the original application for $500,000, the elements of that are being carried over almost exactly to the phase 2 request, which doesn't say to me that there's been any change in the approach to the building from a strictly engineering approach to a more preservationist approach. That's
Thank you, Nancy. And I will urge Tom Wilson and Rosalind to review this tape carefully in anticipation of when they might come back to us and talk to us about.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. I'm so grateful for the thoughtfulness of this committee. You're an amazing crowd. The Concord Free Public Library, and preservation of tapes. Where are we on this one? A quick.
Aye.
Aye. Paul, yes.
Aye.
Aye. Charles?
Aye. Aye.
Pete? And me too. So that's a high priority and an aye. Okay. Yay. All right. The town of Concord, the Assabit River Bluff Preservation and Housing.
Just a clarification. Is this an all or nothing of funding given, or can this be trimmed? A little bit of trimming on this one would go a long way, but I don't know whether this is $1 million or nothing on it. But these are all trimmable, I guess.
For Assabit?
Yeah.
Oh. I think it's pretty rigid.
Well, they have to make it up.
Yeah.
from other sources.
Here's Marcia.
Hi.
all or
Yay.
nothing.
Oh, yeah, there she is.
It's all or nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I love clarity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's obviously not Marcia's decision. That's our decision. But I think what she's saying is that if they don't get this funding, it's going to be very hard for them to move forward. And that they need this kind of vote of approval, this kind of statement that will let them do the things they need to do. I think I'm going to suggest a strategy on this. I think it would be lovely to hear. I know I initiated having Lee Smith come, but I think it would also be lovely to hear from and I've got to get it right this time, the Concord historical, no, the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, have someone from that committee come and talk with us before we go any, so it's deferring it, not with any, sentiment that it's not something we support, but that to hear from them first, and let's hope we can do this in December, and then come to some adjudication. Paul.
I think both Nancy and I queried Lee about sort of on the open space part of this.
Right.
And I think we got a response that basically says it's an open process. I'd like, make sure we keep the open space interest in balance, because we keep talking to housing authority, and that's great. But I mean, I think we need to know that balance is maintained. I fully trust what he said, but I think all the stakeholders are going to keep their eye on this, and we should as well.
Oh, absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. Tom.
So maybe folks can help me understand this concept. So the $1 million goes into the 2.8 acquisition.
That's
And
right.
the property is acquired, and that's an awesome thing. And the open space is preserved, and the riverbank and all, really fantastic. And let's say there's a scenario where the affordable housing just cannot be realized. Basically, even though, as I think, as was stated by Lee, you might think of these as independent requests. There's no clawback on the piece of it that would have funded the housing. It would have been then $1 million for open space to preserve the woodland. Am I thinking about that the right way? I mean, it is possible that they might not get to a scenario where there will be affordable housing. Marcia, maybe you can help me understand that.
I think we're trying to balance exactly that, trying to balance the two needs. We want to be able to walk away, we preserve as much open space as possible, but walk away so that there is some, if we're unable to do the affordable housing, that we could sell that development piece and get back a certain percentage of funds, which would be returned to either CPC or the Affordable Housing Trust, so that
Oh,
it could be used
okay,
for
thank you.
another. So that's,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
the intention.
Thank you for that clarification. I missed that important point.
Now, Liz, do you have anything to add to that? Liz Rust is here. I don't know if she has. Hi, Liz.
Yes, hi, how are you?
We heard from Lee Smith earlier this evening, and we're going to hear from the people on the trust, or from someone from the trust. I mean, Linda's on that as Linda Escobedo, but she's also the observer from the select board. I don't know if she wants to play both roles simultaneously. So we
Well,
will,
oh, sorry.
oh, go ahead.
The trust and the CHDC are meeting tomorrow, and this is one of the things that they'll talk about together. So, so conversations are certainly happening there. And the select board last night transferred all the prior affordable housing funds that had been appropriated from free cash to the trust.
Right.
So the funding, like as in Marcia's presentation, part of the funding requests for this not only was the CPC, but included that funding so that the trust would have to provide that. So I think that their support is critical, not just for the affordable housing in the town, but also as a funder. So they will in fact be a funder for this project.
Right.
I think that one of the, and it's an evolving, as you know, because as you've been hearing about it, it's an evolving project because of the timing and how it's come. But certainly that the portion of the land that the housing will be situated on, and that's really under discussion about what exactly, like how would the land be apportioned between the two uses, but is very desirable and marketable land. So should the whole thing blow up from a housing perspective and the parcels subdivided, and you have the part that's protected under a conservation restriction, and then this housing portion, if the housing was not able to go forward, it would be marketable at some level. Now, is it the right level? Is it the right amount? It depends on exactly how much, how much land that is, but it is the upland part, and it has appraised very well as a total parcel. So what would the appraisal be for this one portion? We can't really say that now because we don't know the exact portion of it, but it has the housing portion does have market value to it.
Thank you, Liz.
If that's helpful, it's helpful.
helpful.
It's an evolving strategy, but to Tom's question of what happens when you get down the road and the housing can't happen. And so that's very much on the project team's minds, and
Sure,
that's
Yeah,
current thinking.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
thank you so much for helping to answer that question. I just, Diane, to your general point, I think this is a super high priority. It's awesome project.
So from your perspective, it is a high priority. Yeah. As we go around, Carlin has a comment, and so I want to just fold her in. Carlin, what is your comment?
Thank you. Very briefly, Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. In this conversation regarding affordable housing, please don't forget that the CPA spent $300,000 2 years ago on the Commonwealth Avenue project for the Concord Housing Authority. And I'm wondering if the CPA has some obligation to make sure that those funds are not wasted as that house twists in limbo, waiting for some additional funding to be complete. So please don't forget about that project either.
It's very much on our mind. Thank you very much. Heather, you want to address that question? No. you don't.
I don't have an update on that project at this time.
Liz.
Yeah, I mean, Charles could also, but I know that there was funding actually available from multiple sources. The problem was really the construction costs were really too high. And, it's a bad time to be constructing homes right now, right? I mean, the supply chain and the construction costs and all of that. So I know the Housing Authority has gone back and taking a look at alternate strategies and continues to do that. So if it doesn't go forward, the CPC funds would be returned or repurposed, whatever your process is.
Repurposed or whatever. Thank you, Liz, very much. May I hear other comments from the committee? And thank you, Carlin and Liz and Marcia. Peter, where are you on this?
I think this is a high priority, given the fact that this type of open space does not come up for sale very often. And we do know that there is a deadline here. I believe we have until town meeting for a decision to be made, if I'm not mistaken. Having said that, one of the things we've learned in the past couple of weeks is that there's a lot of concern about community involvement in the surrounding neighborhoods. And also there's a lot of concern about traffic safety issues. So hopefully, both of those will be addressed as part of this process.
Peter, that's such a helpful comment. Thank you so much. Nancy, where are you?
I echo what Peter said in terms of community involvement and also community expectations. And after reading all of the letters about this project, I'm becoming more and more concerned about safety, and the push to develop as much as possible on that land might be directly antithetical with public safety. Having said that, I think it's a very, very high priority for me, and I think it's laudable that everybody's talking about different goals and how to make the match. So.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It really has brought the community in an interesting way together, hasn't it? In a kind of a broad public discourse that is important. Yeah, Charles.
Well, of course, I'm high priorities. I've expressed many times before, but I just want to reemphasize the concept of actually land banking as far as the housing is concerned. We buy it, and we'll have plenty of time to work with the public in terms of what would be eventually used, how much eventually would be used for housing.
Thank you, Charles. John?
High priority. Really nothing more to add.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, this is a high priority, high complexity project. I think what I've heard from
I'm not laughing, I'm agreeing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear. And I think I personally have a lot of trust in the various people I've heard from who'll be taking this project forward, that all the stakeholders' considerations are going to be balanced. That's important. So I have some comfort in that. I'm not sure everybody in the public has that, but I do. That's a high priority project. I have high confidence it's going to be executed well.
I think in a memorandum of understanding, we can make it very clear that this is our expectation.
Yeah.
And Tom, you're still in the high priority category here?
Yeah, I'm absolutely in the high priority category. If I may just, maybe for the record, maybe it is implied, or I'm inferring that in terms of context, leaders on screen and that are directly involved in this proposal see this as the best $2.8 million investment that town can make right now in terms of what possible investments are out there around these goals of open space and affordable housing. And so I guess I trust that in terms of the broader context, this is the highest priority and investment, because it's a large amount of money that has the most promising return.
Thank you so much. And from my perspective, I'm just going to be the Lorax for a minute, and I'm going to speak for the trees. And to say that you all know this, the Susian reference I'm making, right? Yes. I'm the Lorax, I speak for the trees. Yes, no, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm definitely speaking for the trees, and I just hope that whatever we do, as I've watched developers around town, there has been a strong tendency to knock down all the trees. Look at the project right down from our place on Sudbury Road, the big mansion that sits adjacent to the center of Concord, where the huge numbers of trees have just been knocked out. And oh yes, it'll be replanted, but that's not the same. There's a whole underworld network of support that trees give each other and that become part of an infrastructure and a support system. And I hope that what I hope that in our memorandum of understanding, we can emphasize the importance of a world that is full of as much vegetation, that is carefully managed as possible. So that's something just that's my perspective on this one. High priority, absolutely. But as we cobble together a memorandum of understanding, I hope that some of those sentiments can be thoroughly expressed. Junction Village open space.
Oh, I thought we did that.
Now they have very nicely lopped $50,000 off, so they're down to $250,000. They've wonderfully worked with the NRC. They're also going to the Historic Commission. And so, I mean, I think they're doing due diligence on this project in a really, and I think, you know, watching the changes in that project as they've worked on it, you know, it's been really exquisite. I mean, I feel like it's been very thoughtful. Paul.
Yeah, I think this is a very important piece of land, and it's a very good conceptual plan for what to do with it. The timing is an issue. I mean, I've heard some reticence on the select board, but maybe the more informed opinions of people on the ground who are trying to make this efficient. So I vote this as you know, an H minus, you know, high priority. Probably not the highest of all the open space pieces, but you know, pretty high.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to call on people just to expedite the discussion. Tom, where are you on this one?
Well, I had reduced it to 250 and it sounds like that's where they are. And so I would support it at that level. I think it's medium high, I guess. I think there's other things that are more of a priority, but I would, if our pro forma supports it, I would support this.
Thank you very much. John? Can't hear you. John, you're muted. Oh, there you go. Nope, you're muted.
Yeah, no, sorry. I agree with Tom. I think it's high priority and they did reduce their funding and I'm impressed with the citizen leadership.
Thank you. Peter?
I think I would agree. The only question I have is, have we heard from Natural Resources on this in terms of their input?
Heather, have they written us a letter of support? Seen a letter of support, but here's Carleen. She may be, I know they visited the Natural Resources Commission.
Well, in any event, I see this as a high priority, definitely. I just was curious as to, because that input is just helpful for us.
Yeah, Carleen, has there been something in writing yet from the NRC?
Not in writing. I presented to them and I am meeting with Delia and Greg Higgins tomorrow, and we'll re-present to them, but we'll have no problem meeting their adjustments to the concept plan. But I didn't actually ask for a letter because I felt that would be not fair until I actually met their requests. And so we're still in process for that.
Well, once that's happened, if you could have Delia or someone scoot us a note.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it would be very helpful.
Without question.
I had heard that there was some sort of prohibition about town committees writing to commission. I don't know what that's all about, but
maybe it doesn't apply to town projects. I don't know. There are a lot of committee recommendations or support letters.
That's what but anyway, that I heard that about the White Pond thing. So I'm just, you know, if you, Carleen, please recommend that we get that.
I will. Thank you so much. I will.
Terrific. Nancy, where are you on this?
I second the idea of the leadership. I've watched this a little bit from the very beginning, and I think it's been a really interesting model. I'm wondering, and I'm also persuaded by the argument of getting the essential site work done when the machinery is on site and other things are not going to be disrupted terribly. I am interested in what happens when we put all these high priorities together. And so for this project, I'd wonder if if those essential site work pieces could be identified in case the project might need to be reduced even more. But I
Okay.
think it's a high priority. I love the project.
Thank you so much. And Charles?
I'm very satisfied with this as it's presented now. I see that the need to coordinate some construction work between Junction Village and the open space site, that I think is a definitely compelling reason for us to go ahead with this now.
Yes, exactly. And Charles, as Liz has instructed me, as the Christopher Heights project and the Junction Village Park.
Right.
We're all going to have to get our language down. So that's good. And I too, I think I've canvassed everybody. I too believe this is an important project, and I think it's particularly important because it sits on a very public space. You know, one near the prison, one around what are now going to be the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, area. I mean, I just think care for this space is important. And so I'm grateful for the work that the committee is doing, and so I see this as an HP minus, M plus. How's that? Knowing that we all think it's very strong, but we wonder if we could shave a little bit of money if we had to. We'll wait and see, how everything balances out. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes. Does that seem to reflect? Okay. Okay, the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, we're down to $80,000. I'm inclined to hold this discussion until Burton is here. He's had some pretty strong feelings about the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail in that particular area. So, and so has Sarah Grimwood. So if it's okay, I'd like us to hold on that discussion until they're both, one or both is with us. Is that okay with everybody? Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I'm just to clarify, I think Burton's is concerned with $30,000 of this $80,000, because I think that $30,000 is the upgrade of that fence, and the fence is a bit of a sticking point that really needs some discussion and Marcia's input. I do know that there's some history of not only Marcia's research, but the Bruce Freeman Rail Trails input and the Stone Route Lane. There's a lot of input that I think we need to hear about. But I think his questioning is, I can't speak for him, it's probably on the 30 of the 50, 30 of the 80. So just want to go on the record for that. We can hold off on that. I think this is a high priority project. I think Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, anything to do with that, and it's just a kind of crown jewel of the assets in town, well developed, managed, and balanced state funding versus town funding over time. It's just I don't want us to get stuck on a fence, but on a specific fence. But if it has to be deferred, let's defer it.
Okay, I would prefer to have as it were, the people who have the most at stake in that discourse to be present when we even decide whether high or medium or whatever. The Assabit River Pedestrian Bridge, $300,000 for the design. I wonder, Marcia, are you still with us?
Looks like.
Yes, I am.
Oh, hi, Marcia. Can you tell us why it's that much money for a design?
Well, they haven't done all the permitting piece, and it's not just an engineered bridge. There is a lot of an aesthetic. We have architects working on the bridge, and I don't want to blame them for raising the cost, but they're looking at a variety of different ways of screening, and then you also have the structure piece of it as well, and the permitting is going to be challenging. So I don't have all the details. Elizabeth Hughes does. I can get back to you with that.
I think we would love to have that, because yep, thank you. That would be terrific. So short of that, where are we? Clearly, I think we need more detail on this one, but let's see where we are. John?
Marcia, is this, well, I guess we'll know a little bit more when you report back, but is it an all or nothing type of situation?
I don't know. If we have the full amount, we can request a full amount for a grant from the Mass Trails Council or Mass Trails Grant. So I don't know if they require a 50, an even match or not. And so that's another piece of the information that I think you need before I can.
Thank you.
Thank you. All of that will be very helpful, Marcia. So John, where are you otherwise on this project?
Undecided.
Undecided. Okay. Nancy, where are you?
I'm getting confused by everything I've read recently, but I think Elizabeth wrote the supplementary memo that said that if the project wasn't funded this year, it would reflect a lack of priority on the part of the town and getting back into, I think it goes into the tip, right?
That's right.
So that's a 5-year rolling program, and it might not make it back up again, was her concern, as I recall. I also think if you actually looked at the Mass DOT documents, you can understand why the cost is high.
Yeah.
The steps that they require for a project like this is really pretty impressing. That's a combination of impressive and depressing. A lot.
Well, we'll see if the OE picks that up as a new word next year. Impressing.
But other than that, I think it is a high priority project, and I would hate to lose the funding for that. And I think there is some risk, but as somebody else said earlier, maybe Concord will be seeing more infrastructure money, but who knows?
Thank you so much. Charles, where are you?
Yeah, I was convinced by Elizabeth's memo that, we have to show earnest money and earnest that we're earnest about wanting this project. So I'd say we ought to fund it.
Okay.
And I think I can understand why it's so expensive, because look at all the specialists you have to get involved with in terms of just creating a detailed design for that. It's incredible. So I'm not surprised.
You can spend $50,000 on architectural drawings for a house. Easy.
Whoa. I'm in the wrong field. Tom, you're so pretty.
Complicated. It's complicated.
John, you still have your hand up. Do you want to add something else? No. Okay.
No.
Okay. Peter, where does your thinking about this one?
I see this as a high priority. I think this is more than just a bridge. This is a chance to really bring in the community from Baker Avenue and sort of create a tighter linkage with the West Concord Village. And I also mentioned this before, I think there's an opportunity to also provide better access for the residents at Concord Green. So I see this as a high priority.
Thank you very much. Paul?
Yeah, in the spirit of not allowing myself to rank everything a high priority.
Oh, you're just one of those easy graders, Paul.
I know, there's no point in doing that.
You're every student once.
I would rank this as an H- or an M+. Look, I think it's an important project, but I'm thinking of the other priorities in open space and recreational, and I think they would benefit more of the town. So, I mean, I'm not saying this is not an important project, but if I had to rank this versus the other ones, it would be a bit below the other ones of similar.
More important.
Similar assets. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, I guess I feel strongly both ways, if you can do that. And that is, as I think was described, Bruce Freeman is like the crown jewel, and I absolutely agree with that. This project has kind of that potential to connect, I don't know, thousands of people on Baker Ave to a center and public transportation. It just seems like it's a forward-looking project and something our town wants to support. Marcia, I would say, has also done and her team a brilliant job. Like the design scope is really clearly defined.
Yep.
And it's, there's the design concept with, 4 different consultants: wetland delineation, survey, hydraulics, geotechnical, it's very clear and easy to understand. That said, when I did my homework several days ago, I brought 300 to 220 to 225 to make my math work. Now, Marcia, you may want to respond to that. I'd be definitely open, but I did get to a balanced bottom line by suggesting that here. I don't know if that was the right thing, because I love this project. I think in terms of something that's probably many, many years out, but it was Marcia many years ago that had this vision for Bruce Freeman.
Yeah.
And look now, it's incredible. Some projects do need that. This bridge project is going to need a lot of funding sources that are going to go beyond CPA funds and
Absolutely.
town. Yeah.
It's going to connect more than just the Baker Ave. When you stop and think, you look at the whole vision of how we think about the town. Once we connect to Baker Ave, there's the potential to cross Route 2 at Elm Street. And now we are able to connect Concord Center to West Concord.
Yep.
And you could do it by bicycle, and we're going to do it safely. So, these pieces, just begin to fit together, and we continue to do one piece at a time. And,
Yeah, but Marcia, you've got a big vision, and that's, we need to respect that. No, it's awesome.
Oh, it's really fantastic, actually.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Tom, you may be right that what depends what Marcia brings us back, if we could find our missing money there.
Yeah. Well, I would also like to just bring up the one thing. I mean, I'm excited about this project. Actually, I've been watching it in its nascent form for now the years the CPC is playing around with it. Exactly. And but I keep wondering why the businesses on Baker Ave who would profit so much from being connected with a clientele that could move in and out more freely, whether we have tapped them to contribute to this in some way. I'm sure we're going to, as the project goes forward, over and over again in one way or another. But it just seems to me that that's not an unimportant consideration. And Marcia, before you respond to that, I want to say one more thing. My training from Jay Forrester, who was a Concord resident at MIT in urban housing, Jay Forrester always argued that, that there's a multiplier effect. And the minute we do this, the existing parking over on Baker Avenue right now can oftentimes be full very, very quickly. And so, one of the things we have to think about is, if this works, magnificently, and this is again a long-term consideration, but how do we balance the parking needs, and just thinking about all of that, because we can't just look at how it's used now and think, aha, because more people will want to use it under these circumstances. Axiomatically that will follow. So, Marcia.
Well, they have contributed the land in order to provide the landing. They're going to provide an easement to get over to Baker Ave, so it qualifies for Mass DOT funding. And they are going to come up with some additional funds for this final design phase. So I think the owners have contributed toward the owners of 300 Baker Ave have contributed to this project already. And they funded the initial $10,000 that allowed us to do the feasibility study as part of their special permit back in 2000.
Marcia, that's terrific. If you could send that information to us, just so that it's on the record, I think that would help. I'm thinking ahead to the town vote. I think that would help in terms of public knowledge about the existing, business, fiscal support for this undertaking.
Very good.
Okay, I just think that would be really helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, so far we haven't cut down a thing, you guys. We're easy graders here. No, the White Pond is now, we've saved that $36,000 in a stroke. The Concord Recreation Department and the Recreation Facilities Strategic Plan. May I hear some commentary? Paul, why don't we start with you? This is, I think, probably near and dear to your heart. So why don't you?
Yeah, I think I think Anna justified it quite well, looking at how the 2014 strategic plan has been a template for the development and the justification of a lot of CPC funding and other initiatives. That plan is out of date, and to think of the Recreation Department proceeding blindly for the next 5 years without a roadmap, I think is, I can't think of that. So I think they do need a plan. And I think the plan is expansive in that it just not only covers things under Anna's purview, but recreational assets in general in coordination with NRC and DPW. Whether this can be 75,000 or 70 or 60, we don't know. I think she put in a budget that she think is reasonable. You know, if we needed $5,000 or $10,000 out of this, you know, I don't think it's going to gain us much. I think this is a very high priority project and would benefit, you know, the town and all the capital planning, all the things that go into planning for the recreational assets in the town. So it's very high priority.
Thank you very much. Tom, where are you?
In my model, I brought this to 0, and that was a change I just made today, given what I think was the discussion with the select board last evening, that I think that it's possible that we recommend the town consider funding this in other ways, and that CPA funds may have, I don't know, higher and better uses where you know, in terms of getting at some of the housing open space preservation kind of pieces. And that's what it felt like to me. It felt like that the conversation was potentially heading in that direction, but I may have been reading a bit into it. And Diane and Linda, you might be able to correct me on that.
I thought that was very much the sentiment of the select board last evening. Linda, do you have a different opinion or a similar opinion? She's in the, oh,
Yeah, no, again, I,
get a cup of tea. No, go ahead.
again, I think this was included in the list, in the sentiment that all of these projects are worthy, and we just didn't rate it as the highest priority.
Right.
I think that's the best to say. And I do think that while it wasn't said specifically, I think for at least some of the individuals there, the expectation that there could be funds found elsewhere.
Thank you, Linda. I would add that there was a question asked by Henry Dane about how many of these projects are town funded.
Correct.
And I think that to some degree suggests a question about how many of these projects could be supported or underwritten by the town. A rather smaller project like this, as opposed to the rather larger projects that we are addressing right now, is very interesting, I think. Yes, Paul.
Just a clarification. So on the White Pond project, so that one was dropped because actually it was in the town budget, unbeknownst to some, and it was being funded. Are the funds available for fiscal year in this? Because if not, it would have to be pushed over for another year. And I think, you know, is that what the select board is thinking, that this is needed, but not needed right away? We could start in 2024. It's, you know, it's something that, honestly, it's needed by somebody, and it could be written by the Recreation Commission, I guess, but we wanted to get some professional help on this.
Well, I think the funding would be for 2023, perhaps, rather than 24, because the budget for 2023 would be presented to the town at the warrant and at the town meeting. And so one presumes then that rather late in the spring, such a project could be undertaken, or it may be that the town fiscal year doesn't start until July 1st, Linda?
So yeah, it doesn't start till July 1st, but I'm trying not to exceed the comments of the select board as a whole in terms of what I'm saying here this evening. So, you know, I'll just repeat that, you know, it was commented on several times that this was considered a worthy project just not the highest priority in the way that we rank some of the higher priority projects. So I think that's the best way to characterize it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
very-
no, it's a different type of project, but just to clarify, if this isn't funded till 2023, the plan really is not finished until the end of 2023, which means it doesn't really apply until 2024.
This
I mean,
is true, but
the use of the plan.
even if we give them the money, the same would be true.
Well, a year earlier, so.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't mean that in a disputatious way, Paul. I mean, I just think that, you know, well, Peter, where are you on this one?
You know, on the one hand, I think we saw a lot of benefit from the last such plan that was done. And we've seen some real improvements in terms of recreational facilities throughout the town. I will say, on the other hand, if this is a lesser priority for the select board, I think that would change my perspective in terms of how I would prioritize this. So I would probably, you know, move this to a low to a medium.
Thank you, Peter. John?
Medium, if we can work out the numbers, I'd like to see this funded for Paul, all the reasons Paul gave us. But I think it goes into the final mix.
Thank you, John. Nancy?
I think medium.
Okay.
And I'm interested to know, I know sometimes budgets have little cushions here and there, even in town departments. So I'm also wondering about town funding.
Charles?
Pretty much agree with John and yeah, that it should be done, but can we find a different way to fund it?
Okay. Tom, where are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Oh,
think
that's
I
right. You went to
spoke
zero.
first.
I'm
Yes,
sorry, I
thank you.
forgot.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I just would add that one of the things that I'm thinking about is that if I were Anna, who's just Anna Cohen, right? It's, I believe is her name, who's just joined, that to have a blueprint from which to work and think would be extraordinarily advantageous for her. And so if we can find a way to help support this in some way or another, if we just happen to have that extra money, this might be a very good thing. Because when you're brand new in an organization and you're brand new, you know, to organizing your request for funding and how to proceed, it maybe she'll just be able to add this and say, I need this before I can proceed. But it's something just in my considerations or balances is on my mind. In terms of support for the staff right now of Concord. Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I mean, I don't think we should fund a project just to support an individual, but she's new and doing a great job, and she's asking for this funding to lay out her template because, you know, she's new on, you know, the previous plan was not her plan. She'd like to develop her own plan. So this would be a vote of confidence for Anna, I think.
Yeah, well, this is still a medium project, I think, from all of us, from all of our points of view, from zero funding to, you know, if we have the money, some partial funding to get it started. But I don't hear right now a groundswell for it, but I just, you know, wanted to throw in some of the balancing perspectives I've been thinking about. Tom?
Well, and I would agree with the medium. My strategy, and I don't know if it's reasonable, would be to suggest back to the select board that, you know, we think this is important and we would like to see it happen. However, as the select board last night asked us to make certain trimming, you know, to fit within our own budget, that could they pick this up? You know, I don't know if there can be that kind of dialogue. I'm sure Heather can make that
I mean,
happen.
it would be fantastic. I mean, we've asked the town to sharpen their pencil, you know, and on a couple of things, and Marcia's done that with enormous grace. And so, you know, that's something that we will be doing too as we go forward. So to summarize, and of course, staff and technical support, I think I'm going to just presume we all think that's a high priority and go from there. I think the areas where, just to summarize our deliberations tonight, we're going to need to hear more on the Right Tavern. We're going to need to hear more on the Assabit River Bluff Preservation Program. And we're going to need to hear more on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail discussion until we have a full committee, present. There is our challenge now between now and the next meeting is to do exactly what Tom has modeled with such thoughtfulness, which is to get your pens and pencils out and to practice your own sense of, okay, if we took this one out and this one out, would we get to the right place? In order to do that well, Heather, we need a new motto which tells us exactly, takes out the $36,000, reduces the reductions where they've been already suggested, which gives us a sense for how much money we really have and how much money, therefore, what the shortfall is, so that we can all sit down and do that over the course of the next 2 weeks. Does that make sense to everybody?
Well, just one comment. There are some differences in the final number because Peter had a 2.15 and we're looking in the sheet at 2.061.
That's right.
So
That's what I meant, John. We have to know what the final numbers are before we can sharpen our own pencils and look at it.
but Heather may be able to get the answer for it.
Yeah, the spreadsheet did not reflect the latest memo from Kerry in finance. So when I update the template, I will update that
Thank you.
information.
Great.
Yeah, that's what I was suggesting. Thank you, Heather, so much.
And also, if I could add, Heather, in your email is a much improved spreadsheet where everything rolls up and you get percentages, the whole thing works. So
Yeah.
you might want to distribute that around and.
Okay, thank you.
Terrific. And I actually figured out how to print it tonight, thanks to our son. So this was great fun. Peter.
So I just wanted to circle back. We are going to be getting the consolidated feedback from the select board in some type of a memo in the near future.
I presume so.
Okay. And secondly, will we also be receiving anything from any such guidance as well from the town manager?
I don't believe,
Typically we have.
I understand that, Peter, but I don't believe so right now.
Okay.
I don't think it's discourteous for us not to ask for it. I just think there is sufficient distraction in that department and area right now that that it's probably prudent on our part to move forward right now without that.
And I am not. So
I hear a different opinion. That's just my sensibility from watching and listening as carefully as I can.
I agree with that.
Makes
If-
sense.
If Linda agrees.
Yeah, Linda, what do you think?
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt for Heather to ask, but I wouldn't necessarily expect it at this point. And the other thing is that Matt has forwarded to you, Diane, just within the last half hour.
Oh, good. Okay. Fantastic. Then
Thanks, Linda.
I'll send it to Heather, and Heather, you can forward it to the committee. Would that be okay?
Yes,
Thank-
please do that. Thank
Very
you.
much. Linda, would you scoot a note back to Matt for me right now that says, thank you?
I've already done that, thanks.
I figured that, knowing you. Okay, well, I will scoot one on as well. Okay. Other questions or summaries? Peter, thank you for that summary. That's very helpful. Okay. Review of the voting process. Well, there's not really, I mean, it's what we're doing, right? We're talking together, we're deliberating together, and we'll continue to do that. Our next meeting, I believe, is December 21st. And then
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So
And then-
I am
We're-
gathering from our discussion tonight that we will not be ready to vote at the December 21st meeting. So I will just continue to list like discussion of potential recommendations. And perhaps if we feel that we're ready at the first January meeting, then we would list on the agenda specifically that we would be voting on recommendations.
Okay.
If we don't, feel comfortable doing that, even if it's listed on the agenda, that item can always be continued to the following January meeting.
Thank you, Heather. If the Right Tavern folks aren't going to be ready to discuss things with us until January, then I think maybe after that discussion at that meeting, we would be able to make, a vote, but that's yet to be determined, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, let's go on to the approval of minutes for a minute. You have 2 new minutes up. uh, November 9th, November.
Diane?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Excuse me. I just
I'm
wanted to, no, my fault. I wanted to just reflect on our last process with Wright Tavern. And I think one of our advantages was I think we had a delayed town meeting and it extended the warrant close. Heather, does that sound right? And we were able to get it maybe another meeting or 2 in there. And just may not have that same flexibility this
This
year.
time.
So, yeah, I think we did have a little extra flex. Does that sound right?
I think you're right. I mean, it was COVID. It was COVID dramatic. I mean, so there were all sorts of changes going on a regular basis.
We have the 4th and the 18th.
Right. So the November 4th, may I hear any comments on the November 4th or the November 18th minutes? Any recommendation to accept the November 4th minutes?
So moved.
Recommendations. Nancy, so moved. Do I hear a second?
I have one question about, is it the 4th or the 9th?
9th.
Okay, I thought you said the 4th, John, and I
I
didn't.
was talking about the January meetings, January 4th and 18th.
Yes, okay.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, I thought we were doing minutes. Oh, sorry.
Okay, the minutes are what dates, Heather? I don't have that up on my screen.
November 9th and 16th, November 9th and 16th.
Yeah, okay. So, Peter, you have a comment on the 9th.
Yeah, just a very brief comment on the second page under Junction Village Open Space, second paragraph. Says Mr. Ward asked that what future CPA requests, it says will be for. It should say requests for subsequent phases will be for. Because I believe in the application, there was a reference to phase 1.
Thank you, Peter. Do I hear it, Paul?
Yeah, I have a minor comment on both minutes. Right at the end, my name is misspelled. Sorry about that. But on the on the 16th minutes at the bottom of page 2, where it
Wait,
says,
let's stick with the 9th for just a minute, Paul.
"Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. It's just that's the one that's been forwarded. Do I hear other corrections to the November 9th besides the important spelling of people's names? Okay, do I hear now then a second with that emendation from Peter and Paul?
Second.
Second that.
Okay. And then all in favor, we don't need a roll call for this, I don't think. All in favor, raise your hand, please. To accept the minutes, and that's unanimous, and I do so declare. Now the November 16th minutes. Paul, you have a question.
right at the bottom of page 2, where I was talking about the bidding process. It says Mr. Bohm noted there would be a need for a bidding process, which would likely drive up the cost of the project. I don't think I said that. I think I said it would likely affect the cost of the project. I don't think a bidding process necessarily drives up the cost of the project. So I think it should be changed to likely affect the cost of the project.
Thank you. Are there other emendations?
Yeah,
Okay,
this is Peter. I have one more on the second page under Community Preservation Committee,
mhm.
third paragraph. Mr. Ward stated that there were safety concerns, specifically traffic safety concerns with the project based on letters received from the community. We received, what was it, 41 letters. So
That's
that
right.
was what that was in reference to.
At least.
Thank you. Okay, with those emendations, do I hear a recommendation to accept the minutes for November 16th? Oh, somebody just has to say.
So moved.
So moved. Thank you, Tom. Is there a second?
Second,
Thank you, Paul. All those in favor indicate by raising your hand.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Okay. besides thanking Linda and Carlene for their enormous patience going through all this, and Marcia, do either of the three of you have any comments you would like to add to our proceedings tonight? Well, hearing
No.
hearing that, I want to thank you all so much for your due diligence and your support. Paul?
Can I make one unrelated observation? Just
Of course.
so so I was at the Recreation Commission meeting the other night, and a number of residents were on that meeting, and they commented on the Emerson Field project, which was funded by CPC, I think, a couple of years ago. And they were very much concerned about the project. And Matt Johnson was on there. They had several concerns, but what I gauged from that was that they were unaware of the project when it was proposed, when the application went forward. That connected me to sort of the community reaction to the Assabit Bluff project, where there was a significant number of people who seemed to be unaware. Now, you could argue that, you know, there are a lot of things in town they should be aware of that, but I'm just wondering if in the future, more of an outreach of the CPA and the CPC process to the town so that people aren't blindsided by some of these applications. This is not at all a commentary on any of our deliberations, because I think they're great. I'm just reflecting on what I've heard from on 2 occasions from town residents that basically said, how'd this happen? I was unaware of it. Why didn't somebody tell me about it? And so I don't know what the solution of that is. It's just an observation that across a couple of projects, several years. So I don't know if you've heard that before. Probably not uncommon in the town that people are unaware, but you know, I just don't know what to make of that.
Well, you know, Paul, the absence of a town newspaper that helps people to know what's going on in town has been a real issue. And I think that I mean, there's so much research on this right now that's out there. If you read the second back Atlantic Monthly, which details exactly how local newspapers have been systematically destroyed, manipulated, exploited, and destroyed in this country, it's really pretty alarming. There is a groundswell to try to start a newspaper online here in town, and that would be a real help. But in the meanwhile, I think that one of the things that we might think about when all this is over, and I hope that Heather, we can remember to put this on some sort of an agenda, which is to think about how the website, the town website, is organized, so that people could rather quickly find their way to the kinds of projects that we're recommending and that we suggest and that we approve, so that people would know that the CPC, and here's where you can go to figure these things out, and not find yourself in a rabbit warren of all sorts of distracting information and no idea how to get to things. Now, I know to people who have created it, it all seems very plain and simple, but I can't tell you the number of citizens I know who've just given up. They go and they get.
Yeah, there seems, I don't want to belabor this, there seems to be a little conflation of the planning board process. These particular residents said, why weren't we notified? We're abutters. And so Matt Johnson, politely explained why, when abutters are notified, building projects, et cetera. But, we have the same type of projects that can affect residents next door. So it's an observation more than anything else. And
it's really important. And there's one thing about cleaving to the I'll use cleaving in his double meaning, cleaving to the law, i.e., adhering to it and being very narrow, versus moving away from the law and just saying, well, it would be helpful if we didn't just adhere to the law and we really let a broad neighborhood know what's happening. And it really makes a difference. I certainly have discovered that when the Department of Public Works is doing something in a neighborhood, if you just simply call them and say, help, could you let me know? That they do respond. But I think not everybody feels that they can do that or even knows how to do that. So anything we can do to facilitate community engagement in the actions of our town would be very helpful.
And it may be just advice we give to the applicants to
Right.
reach out. I know Marcia tried to do that with the Assabit Bluff project, and and I'm not sure other applicants, think it's their responsibility to do that. Maybe it's the applicant's responsibility.
No, that's a lovely comment, and thank you very much.
Yeah.
Are there any other before we adjourn?
Paul, I second what you just said, and I think that what was for a period energizing for me as chair was attending the chair's breakfast, where the chairs of the various committees and commissions, and I think, Paul, you were one, would go around and even at a high level share what they're working on. It was always incredibly enlightening, and if there was a way to make that more broadly visible, it would be wonderful.
Yeah. And of course, you can join that as a member of the citizens, even though you may not be speaking, you can certainly join it and hear it. And it is wonderfully informative.
Sure, but I don't think
Yeah.
people would normally recognize it or
Right.
realize that that's happening.
Yeah. And anybody on this committee who wants to, although I formally attend, anybody here can and should. And it's always helpful. Okay. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Paul and Tom, thank you. Yeah. John, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Do I hear a second?
A second.
Okay, thank you. Charles,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Peter.
Yes.
Yes. Charles, there you are. My screen just changed. I couldn't find it. Charles?
Aye.
Aye, and myself, yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful evening.